everyone. I'm Dr. John Whyte, Chief Medical Officer at WebMD, and I'm continuing my discussion today with Dr. Rick Pazdur, who is the Director of the Oncology Center of Excellence at FDA. You've also been a big proponent of saying inclusion criteria are sometimes needlessly restrictive. Are you pushing more about perhaps liberalizing inclusion criteria or showing more regulatory flexibility as you're doing with COVID? Let's talk about COVID and how that might play into it all, because we're seeing it's even harder to get people in clinical trials. Do we need to be doing clinical trials in home? Some people are talking about that, something that we never thought about. We're making them less intrusive.
Yes, yes, and yes. Okay. So let me talk about COVID, because how could you have a conversation, a medical conversation today?
We have to talk about it at least 10 times a day.
So this put a tremendous social disruption as well as disruption in the entire medical system, especially with the close down of the hospitals to routine medical care that occurred in the earlier part of 2020. So we took some very proactive steps. While the agency was doing COVID, we had to be ensuring that we were taking care of the cancer patients and the cancer community. And we felt that there was a tremendous need to really emphasize the really need to still approve drugs and write guidances dealing with oncology, and also have listening sessions with the community. So we had probably between 12 and 15 listening sessions with patient groups, individual patient groups, established patient groups, the disease-oriented patient groups, ESCO, AACR, all stakeholders. And what we heard universally was something very disturbing. And that was the cancer patient, or the patients with cancer telling us, we are the forgotten patient, okay? We're dealing with this disease. If you could imagine somebody dealing with cancer, the unknowns that exist with cancer, what's going to happen to me? What are the side effects? What's going to happen? How am I going to get my CT scan? Why can't my wife come with me to my doctor's appointment? All of these. So
what did you do?
Yeah. Well, we did several things. First of all, hearing them is one important thing, and I'm not diminishing that because I think that that's important in recognizing it. Secondly, with clinical trials, which we have some supervision over, obviously, we would allow some decentralization of procedures, ways of obtaining informed consent. Moving forward, we want to emphasize that we want COVID patients or patients that have had a COVID and have obviously recovered and that will go on to cancer to be included in clinical trials. And we actually want to take a look at those patients to see in analyses if they have different safety profiles when they are exposed to drugs. In addition to that, we are very interested in looking at the approved cancer drugs and seeing what side effects, what adverse effects that patients with cancer experience after they have recovered from COVID. As you are aware, many of the sequelae of cancer, for example, DVTs, pulmonary toxicity, cardiac toxicity, neurological toxicities, those, I shouldn't say toxicities, adverse events associated with COVID that affect those organs, those have counterparts of toxicities of cancer drugs. So for example, if you gave a patient with cancer that is receiving, for example, a IMiD that's being used for the treatment of multiple myeloma, would they have an increased incidence of DVTs or thrombotic activity? Likewise, drugs that cause pulmonary toxicity. If patients have recovered from COVID and they receive these drugs, will they have a greater incidence of pulmonary toxicity? And the way we're doing this is we're talking, and this is very preliminary work at the present time, but with the major pharmaceutical firms to take a look at obtaining this through real world data.
Will decentralization You think that decentralization and regulatory flexibility will continue post-COVID?
Yes. I really do. I think COVID has taught us many things, okay? How we work, for example. I had been always a proponent to minimize flexi-place, and now I couldn't be the biggest supporter of it because I've realized how important it is. But there has to be certain frameworks, everybody on the same platform, not people in the room and people on a phone, so to speak, but everybody has to be in the same platform. Likewise, if everyone uses the same flexibility in terms of decentralization of trials, I think that's going to be very important. I think we have the flexibility. Will the pharmaceutical firms in turn have that flexibility internally as they construct their trials with their CROs? Here again, we see many times them collecting much more information and making many more visits to sites, investigator sites, than we would deem necessary. They could control the quality of their data. They can't control the outcome, so to speak. So they invest a lot of time and energy in controlling that data quality. Here again, I'm not against good data quality, but we're not demanding perfection here. We realize that there's always going to be some degree of missing data.
What do you think's been the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning? Has it helped as much as people are saying in terms of finding new indications, the role of predictability? What's kind of your take on the role of AI and machine learning?
I think it will direct where we go with two things. Number one, new drug development and new targets, okay, of therapies, how to drug very rare diseases, okay, that share common targets with common diseases, for example, and also on analysis of safety in subgroups of patients, where we'll be able to get greater granularity with artificial intelligence in this area. But I see this as a work in progress.
You think we'll be doing cancer clinical trials in the home?
Yes, I could see that. I could see that.
We never thought that a few years ago, that that's even a remote possibility.
I think that that would be possible, where people will, well, you see that now with telemedicine, you know. Who would have thought you would just call the doctor and just communicate as we're communicating? And I think if we are honest with, in oncology and many diseases, you know, the physical exam is important, but most of the time doctors have, you know, the laboratory evaluation done before the visit, this echocardiogram if you're seeing a cardiologist. So most of that information is already there, and they're going to rely on that information. I think it just speeds up the entire process of, instead of taking an entire day off of work, you could spend 15 minutes on a computer talking to the doctor and probably get the same result. Obviously, for some situations, that is not going to be a situation where you need to do a detailed physical examination on a patient, but that is not always the case.
What does cancer drug development look like 5 years from now?
I think we're going to see more targeted therapies. My hope, my sincere hope, is that we will see a continuation of the advances that we have seen in tumor immunology. I think that this is a major area of growth. I have been very impressed with the checkpoint inhibitors, PD-1 drugs, and other checkpoint inhibitors, of the diversity of the diseases that they have affected and have had a positive effect in. I think we've learned how to manage the toxicity. Again, I think is going to be very instrumental on how we select patients. But I hope that we will be able to move beyond the PD-1 story to the next class of drugs or the next understanding of immunological diseases. If you would ask that question, John, of where we will be in 20 or 30 years, I would like to answer that question for you.
Sure. Give me an
because after, you know, as I tell people, my only regret of being a medical oncologist at this time, having practiced for 40 years, is that I will not be here for the next 40
You never know.
I never know. I'm not betting against myself.
You may not be the director of the Oncology Center of Excellence. All right. So what does it look like in 20 years?
I think what we'll do, I think you go in for a physical examination and they'll collect some blood on you and there'll be some circulating DNA in your system. You won't be able to find where the tumor is, okay? It just won't be visible, okay? And probably do a routine test on you, can't see anything, but the circulating DNA is there. They'll give you some type of immunological therapy to turn on your immune system, measure the circulating DNA in your system, and then cure you of the disease. Because we know that all therapies are better in the earliest stages of disease rather than in advanced disease when you could see it on an X-ray. And that's where I think we will be in the next millennium. I think this, and that's why I think I have much, how should I say it, higher feeling potential for the immunological therapies rather than the kind of targeted therapy looking at specific molecular targets. Once these targets exist and the tumor is established, yes, I think we will have advances there. But the true advances in medicine have generally occurred through immunological advances, such as smallpox vaccines and polio vaccines, the scourges, even the coronavirus.
We're talking monoclonal antibodies, yeah. mRNA, yeah.
Now, climb out of this pandemic is going to not be through a therapeutic, it's going to be through the prevention of the disease.
I'm not sure it's going to take 20 years, Dr. Pazdur, because we already have some preliminary research looking at blood tests to look at some proteins, et cetera, the cancer cells.
John, you may be right. I only am a poor medical oncologist. I am not a fortune teller. If I was a fortune teller, I'd be playing the stock market
There
today.
You go. Well, Dr. Pazdur, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak today. I was telling people earlier today, I'm interviewing an icon cancer research and cancer development.
So does that mean I'm like Cher or Madonna?
It does. You can take it that way. But you really have been a leader in advancing drug development, of getting drugs approved and saving people's lives, improving the quality of people's lives.
Well, John, I just like to say it's not about me. It's really about the people that I work with. And I have just had a tremendous ability to have a first-class team of people that are oncologists and our scientists that work with us and our support people, our administrative people that have provided an environment to do this. So
you've demonstrated the leadership as well. And having worked there, I know how difficult it can be at times. So thank you for all that you do.
Okay, thank you, John.